share my screen here. All right, so this is our last sort of discussion, sort of overview uh, class, recap class. Just a couple of announcements. There's only 3 classes left, but one of them is not even a class. So um, we'll have our last debate on Monday, which will be synchronous. Can we consider robots as teammates? Is emotional intelligence needed for leadership? Are the 2 debates that we'll be having there. I have another mental health day into the syllabus for you all, so you can not expect any sort of assignments there. I could flip it and give you guys extra time on the exam 2, which I might, only because of that last little note there that due to some family health reasons, I may need to travel again like I had to last week. And if that happens, I'll record a review over the weekend and post it for you all. And it may be better to do it on that Wednesday. I'm not sure yet. But the final exam, nonetheless, will be released either the 21st or the 26th. But the due date's not changing, which I believe is a week later. Whatever our official we need to meet deadline is, that's the deadline for the exam. It's in the syllabus. I can't remember the date off the top of my head, though. Okay. Any questions before I move on to the clarifying questions bit? Awesome. All right, so the first clarifying question was from Megan, and she asked, could you clarify the difference between eudaimonic and hedonic well-being? And really, this is a long answer, but generally speaking, the way that you tell the difference is asking, should scholars or someone else tell you what you should be happy about? If your answer is no, then you're talking about hedonic well-being, or oftentimes called subjective well-being. And this is like the dimensions usually assessed with hedonic well-being are positive affect, negative affect, and life satisfaction. As you see, there's some affective component, right? How are you feeling right now? Is it happy, sad, angry, calm, excited? And a cognitive component, so like reflecting on your life or your job. How satisfied are you with your life right now? And neither of these sorts of cognitive or affective components actually ask you what you're happy about. They don't ask you why you're feeling the way that you are. It doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is, how you're actually feeling. What emotional state are you having? How do you see your life right now? In contrast, if your answer is yes, like should scholars tell you what you should be happy about, you're talking more about eudaimonic well-being, or oftentimes called psychological well-being. Often this is tied to Aristotle and his writings in the Nimician Ethics and Eudaimonian ethics. And if you separate the idea of, or the term you and daemon, you usually means well or good, while daemon means divine or spiritual. Some say God. So it's like, what does it mean to be the best self, the best sort of human that you can possibly be? So what does it mean to live the best life? Not what your best life is. It's not saying that, your best life is, chilling at your house watching Netflix or something. It's what is the best life for a human. So there's these standards that all humans should be able to ascribe to, or trying to achieve. So what is the paragon of human flourishing? What are these things that we can that we think are the cream of the crop of what humans should be? What virtues should human embody to live the best life? And these dimensions are things like self-acceptance, social relations, autonomy, competence, purpose in life, and growth and development. And so when you're asked questions related to eudaimonic well-being or psychological well-being, you're asked the degree to which you feel these things are satisfied within your life. It's not how happy you are. It's the degree to which you feel like you are competent, or you feel like you have some sort of competence, or the degree to which you have purpose in life. And so those are inherently different from one another, because when you're looking at eudaimonic well-being, you're prescribing what is good. When you're looking at hedonic well-being, you're just asking whether or not they're happy through affect, positive and negative affect and life satisfaction usually. Any questions or concerns or clarifying remarks on that? Excellent. Often I also put, oftentimes eudaimonic well-being leads to hedonic well-being. So if you are feeling confident, you're happy. But important to question: does everyone need to feel these things equally to be happy, especially from the job? Right? Do you need to have good, positive relationships or social relationships at your job to feel happy? Do you get your feelings of purpose in life from your job, or can you get it somewhere else? So personally, I ascribe to the idea that you need to have these things within your job. You can, but you shouldn't need to. People can go to their job and not feel like they need to have, it needs to fulfill some sort of psychological need of purpose in life for them. They can get that elsewhere. Pranit had a question. I was wondering if you could share more information about virtual teams. I assume that a lot of information was gathered on virtual teams over the last year. I was wondering if there are any findings that may not be covered in the lecture. And the answer is yes. All right, question number 3. Oh, there's a dad joke for you. All right, answer number 2. There's a lot of research going on in virtual teams right now. And unfortunately, the publication process takes a long time, as I was alluding to a little bit earlier, that it takes about sometimes 6 to 9 months for a publication to be published. That's after you've collected and analyzed the data and written up the manuscript. There's a lot more about virtual teams generally that we could take from the literature unrelated to what's happening right now. We could even teach an entire class on it. But aside from most recently, it's important to understand that virtual teams aren't in dichotomy. You aren't a in-person versus a virtual team. It's the degree to which you use these virtual tools. That is what determines your degree of virtuality. There's not a lot of teams, except for a little bit now, that work entirely in a virtual basis. And I think I talked about this in the lecture. A lot of virtual teams have trouble developing many of the social emotional emergent states, like psychological safety, where you feel comfortable expressing some sort of interpersonal vulnerability to the rest of your teammates, or trust, having faith that somebody's going to actually follow through on something that you ask them to do. Having a physical kickoff meeting can really help speed up the team development, especially if these social, emotional, psychological states. It can also help develop your shared mental models. But there is literally no research on how any of these collaborative softwares that you see, like Teams or Skype or like all of the other ones, that Slack, things like that. Like all these things are supposed to facilitate project management and teamwork. There's no literature showing that they actually improve team dynamics, which is not great. But anecdotally, I think you can use, and I think I talk about this a little bit more later, you can use this collaboration software for social means to speed up the development of these more social emotional emergent states and improve the tool's effectiveness. Essentially, what I'm saying there is that if you want to use these tools, you need to make sure that everyone's freaking using them. And a lot of people aren't as technologically open as maybe a younger generation is. So you have your older generations like, what is this Teams thing? What is this Blue Jeans thing? What is this Slack thing? Why do I have to use it? Especially when you're dealing with a lot of white collar work, which are the people who are working remotely right now. If you make it part of their routine and you build it into their routine, they're more likely to use it and develop some of the social emotional emergent states that we've talked about. So that is my answer to that. I think I expand on it a little bit later as well. But any else clarifying questions you need on that? Cool. Jenna asks, do teams have to be classified as a specific type? That is, our team types aren't mutually exclusive. I feel like a team could be classified as both virtual and advisory, or even be classified as production and advisory. Since you said in your slide that production teams are often self-managing teams. The production team is itself its own team then, advisory team then anyways. And this is a great question. No. And for all the reasons that you mentioned, that these categories aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, along with others, essentially that this arbitrary category does not actually meaningfully distinguish different types of teams. Like, it doesn't get at the characteristics that make them different from one another. And so if you want to actually get at the characteristics that make them different from another, the way you do that is actually assessing those characteristics. And so a dimensional approach, so think dimension characteristics. A dimensional approach is becoming more frequently used now. So Hollenbeck in 2012 reviewed the literature and found that the teams literature talks about 42 different types of teams. And so they read through these definitions and came up with basically a 3-dimension taxonomy, which meaningfully distinguish these types of teams. So it's not like they're this bucket, this type of team, or this type of team, but they can vary on these dimensions that are meaningful to how team dynamics unfold within that team. And so the 3 dimensions that they came from: skill differentiation. Basically, does everyone on the team have the same skill set to accomplish a job? I think maybe about a team of waiters or something like that, where everyone basically has the same skill set to accomplish their job in that service industry. Authority differentiation is another one. So is there a hierarchy on the team? So is there like a leader, a middle manager, and a lower person? Is a hierarchy informal or formal? That is what authority differentiation is getting at. And then temporal stability. So how long the team is together, how long they expect to be together, and whether or not membership changes over time. So the degree to which, if someone's coming in and out of your team often, then you would probably have them a little bit lower on temporal stability, especially if they don't plan on the team itself doesn't plan on being a team for that long. And so these are the things that can affect team dynamics. I mean, if you think about it, especially with temporal stability, if it takes a while to develop things like trust and psychological safety and cohesion. You don't have that from the get-go. And if you have members coming in and out all the time, it's really hard to maintain that same level of trust, psychological safety, or cohesion. So these are the dimensions that actually affect, whether something's going to emerge, or the degree to which teams talk to each other. And so that's what people are using, and it's more informative. And yeah, that's about it for that. Any other clarifying questions that you all want to ask? Anything you need me to elaborate on? Excellent. So first of the discussion questions, Vicky asks, situations in the workplace can be stressors that result in job-related emotion-related and physiological strains, such as lack of motivation, burnout, or illness. The way work makes us feel and act can spill over into other aspects of our lives, such as work family conflicts or potentially conflict with friends. But if we are providing helpful resources, that stress may be manageable. Since strains like that are not only deleterious to the person experiencing them, but also harmful to the organization, many organizations provide resources to help cope, for example, coping training, family leave policies, therapy, and more. This leads to my discussion question. Would it be better to work in a company that has a great work environment, so good boss, manageable stress, stimulating tasks, etc., but has no extra resources? I get those well-being resources mentioned earlier, or a company that has a terrible work environment, so a terrible boss, coworkers, difficult tasks, but has any resources that you can possibly imagine. I have my 2 cents on this, but I want to hear from you. Like, where would you rather work? What is better for you in your well-being, do you think?
I would say I'd rather work in a great work environment because then I feel like overall you'd just be happier. Where if you were in a terrible work environment, you'd probably need a lot more resources than you would need if you were just in a great work environment from the start.
It's a really good point, Taylor. I may happen to agree a little bit with that.
This is a bit of a cop out, but like, and it's not one of these options. But I feel like personally, I'd rather work in a work environment that's like average, that has average resources, because I think resources are a really important part of like life in general, and like work is not everything per se. So I don't know. Best of both worlds would be my preference, but that's not really one of these options.
Yeah, that makes sense, and that's where most organizations fall, right? They usually have, some resources that you can use, as well as both a good and bad sort of environment. Um, I appreciate that answer, Claire. Anyone else have a preference? Anyone else feel like they want to work at the terrible work environment place with lots of resources imaginable?
Well, I feel like some of these resources you can get outside of work. So, like therapy, you can get through like an outside source or like through your insurance or something like that. So, I would rather work in a great work environment and then you can still have access to other like third party resources that like if you have a good job that pays well, you can pay for things like that and then you're fine. Or not fine, but like you can have access to those resources.
Yeah, I think, did you mean that you could work for like a terrible work environment, but then have access to all of those resources that would be okay with you, Mary?
Well, I mean, like, if the company has a great work environment but no resources directly through the company, I
Yeah,
would rather do that because then you can also have access to these resources through a third party service. So there is a possibility where
gotcha.
you could have both, but one's through the company and one's through like your own ability to find things for yourself.
No, yeah, okay, I gotcha. That's a good answer. That some of these resources may be available outside of the organizations, but it's 100%. I think the former, and the reason why is, think of a hospital, right? That is challenging and meaningful work, but physicians, especially emergency medical physicians, are burnt out all the time. And it's not like the hospitals don't recognize this. They have all of the well-being resources that you could possibly do. They spend millions and millions of dollars to ensure that burnout decreases um, across the spectrum of their employees. But the problem is no one uses these resources for a variety of reasons. I've interviewed a lot of people who work at hospitals, and they essentially say, hey, there's no freaking time to use these resources because of the work environment. I'm always doing stuff. And B, by providing these resources, like I think I talk about this more in the next question. By providing these resources, you're essentially saying my unhappiness is my problem. Like I am the reason that I am unhappy. I can't deal with the stressors that are around me. Not that there's something structural or organizationally wrong or systematically wrong with the way that the organization is performing their stuff or doing the work or organizing the work. It's me. I need to be more resilient. I need to push through and be better. And that's really the problem. They think a quick well-being intervention is going to change things. And you can have the best freaking resource in the world, but if they aren't being utilized and they're not the core of the problem, meaning the employee, then you're going to have a bad time. You're going to have some very unhappy workers. So it's 100% the former. You want to have an unstressful work environment. I'm going to rephrase this a little bit and to make it a little bit more difficult. And I want you to think about this question going forward for, multiple reasons, mainly that there may be a question like this on the exam. But think of it two different jobs, right? You have this no stress job, right? It's easy, it's routine. Like you have very khaki-like coworkers. So they're beige. They don't make you happy. They don't make you angry or sad. They're just kind of like there. You're not necessarily doing meaningful work. It's 9 to 5. You get good enough pay, you get good enough benefits, but there's nothing stressful about the work environment at all. Then you have maybe a high stress job, right? It's very challenging, very stressful at times, but the work is meaningful. But it may not necessarily be the greatest work environment either. Which do you think is better for your well-being? Now, I want you to think about this with respect to the lecture on stress and how there's a curvilinear relationship between stress and performance, and whether that same curvilinear relationship should unfold for well-being. Especially, I'd like you to think about the different types of well-being that we covered a little bit earlier in this lecture. So think about that, have that on your mind. Again, this video is being recorded. But yeah, just be prepared to think about that a little bit more. All right, question number 2. Aisha asks, as a woman who has taken a lot of leadership roles, I feel at times that I am not taken most seriously when I am assertive and more masculine. Do you think this tendency will change for future women? What do you all feel about this question?
I mean, I hope it changes. Like as like a woman in a STEM field, I do feel this pressure to like almost use the higher pitched customer service voice when I speak in meetings to make myself seem, I don't know, almost a little more feminine-ish. Like it's a weird way to say it, but I really hope it does change, and that being assertive and direct is not associated with gender, but rather associated with the individual person and how effective they are at getting their point across in a meeting or a group setting or leadership role.
I agree. Do you feel like you need to, this is not only to you, Mary, since you already answered, but generally, do the women in this class feel that they need to engage in more masculine, stereotypically masculine characteristics in order to be perceived as a effective leader, like whenever you take on leadership roles?
I think for me at least, I think it depends a lot on what type of leadership role you're putting on, because I'm the president of a choir on campus, and I've found that especially in like a music environment, for me, there's just more pressure to be put together in general. Like I don't think it's so much as needing to be assertive, although I do like feel that there's more pressure in general for me to like have a professional and put together appearance, like when like speaking at events, or like I don't know, I feel like that there are more things that I have to consider about how I present myself, whether that be like me being more assertive at certain times or me being more friendly at certain times. I just feel like there's just more pressure in general to perform a certain way, but I don't know if it's just like more masculine.
No, Claire, that's a really good point. And in particular, it seems like there's an incongruity a lot of times with the particular context in which you are being a leader and the appropriate leadership, or the leadership behaviors that are seen as most effective, depending on like the context. And men often don't have to think about that, right? There's like a blanket assertiveness across different contexts, whereas I think women consider more about the congruity between, like, is it a male dominated field, as Mario was saying, or something else that is a more female dominated field. And that's what generally the research says. So we have society's collective conscious generally holds that stereotypically masculine characteristics are an archetype for effective leadership. Leadership research generally shows across the board that exhibiting masculine traits can help women appear as more effective leaders, especially this is especially true in masculine dominated fields of sports and engineering and top management positions. But I'm going to make my last point now. This to kind of like drill it home. This is the appearance of leadership. So this is how it's not whether or not stereotypical characteristics of females are effective at leadership. It's just whether or not they're being perceived. So it's like ridiculously unfair. So appearing more masculine in interviews can even increase a female's chances of landing the job, no matter the qualifications. There's a study that actually manipulated this, where they just had someone come in for a job interview, same characteristics or same qualifications, and the only thing that they did different was to change whether or not they adapted or ascribed typical male characteristics to themselves, and they were perceived as more qualified for the job, even though there were no qualifications on their resume. Research shows too that top executives don't really differ in terms of their characteristics. Across genders, top executives were typically high in conscientiousness, emotional stability, and extroversion, as well as higher in assertiveness, high level strategic thinking, and decisiveness. And they differed, these top executives differed from these characteristics from those who weren't executives. The point there is that this idea that stereotypically masculine characteristics are being reinforced as things that are generally more effective at being, or perceived as being more effective at being a leader, which again isn't necessarily true. It's about the appearance. And so, like I said here, this doesn't mean that these characteristics are always better. Masculine characteristics, especially during the pandemic, have been tied to short-term business decisions promoting short-term business gains and increased suffering for worker well-being, while feminine characteristics like Empathy, health concern, caretaking, individualized consideration are appearing to be more important for their worker well-being and actually productivity during the pandemic. And so we're in this weird kind of time where we have these kind of prototypes of what an effective leader should be, which are generally masculine based. And I think there's another question that we're going to answer on this. But that doesn't mean that other leadership sort of characteristics, whether characterized as masculine or feminine, are effective at being a leader. So you can have, we just tend to prefer those for, you know, whatever has been in society's collective conscious for a long period of time. And so things will hopefully change soon where an effective leader will be judged on their ability to be effective rather than their ability to be simply assertive or decisive or borderline aggressive. Any questions on this question? Answer. Nope. Okay. So the next question is from, let me switch back over here, Megan, who asks, I once watched a video in which workers were coming out in and out of an elevator just like any other day, but their thoughts were shown above their heads in thought bubbles. How am I going to have enough time to fix dinner tonight? Why does Ashley treat me so poorly? Am I enough? And then after watching this video, Megan realized that you never truly know another person's story or what they're going through. With this in mind, I truly don't understand how mental health isn't a priority in the workplace and how organizations are principally concerned with strain when it costs the organization money or it costs them to lose some of their best workers, such as from Karaoke and the death from overworking, the video I linked in the lecture. What steps are or aren't being taken to raise mental health awareness in the workplace? I think this is a really important question because it reminds us of the progress that we have made, but also reminds us of the long journey ahead that we still have to travel in order to genuinely care for another's well-being. So, in your perception, what steps has Georgia Tech taken that, I mean, because you're essentially, I mean, you're paying to be employees of Georgia Tech in a way, but what steps have they taken or aren't being taken to increase your well-being in mental health or decrease your ill-being?
Well, I live in North Avenue apartments, and I know that I never go to any of the events, but like my RA is always posting like a fun trip to the smoothie day or something, or some sorts of like excursions, I guess. And I think they're aimed to help make people like feel better, get to connect with other people. So I think that's an example of where they're trying to increase your well-being by offering things for you to do and meet people.
That's a good resource to have. You know, if you're from a eudaimonic perspective, if you're increasing your positive relationship with other individuals, you should be generally more happier. So that may be helping you all with that. What else?
So this is something that I think is generally, it's not so much an active effort to improve well-being, but I think all the effort that they put into landscaping and just making sure that the campus looks beautiful. I know I've heard people complain in the past that like it can be hard if you're feeling down to like drag yourself to one of like those like pet the puppies events or something. But I think the fact that on any given day you can just go outside of your dorm or apartment and like see a beautiful place is something that like passively contributes, but like contributes a lot, at least to my well-being.
No, Claire, that's a very, very good point. There is a lot of research showing that the environment plays an important role in your well-being. I always used to walk around Purdue campus and Georgia Tech campus, but Purdue especially has a beautiful campus, just to kind of take it all in and de-stress. I do that here too, but yeah, it's more passively, but I think that's kind of the right way. One of the ways that needs more attention is looking at these sort of more structural characteristics that affect well-being, these, things that aren't a well-being intervention, that might help you feel better. Any other, I know there's probably a lot of other opinions on here, about Georgia Tech and well-being.
I've got one. So this
Sure.
is a little different, but I'm a student athlete here on campus, and recently they created a wellness room for student athletes to be able to come and hang out, and they have a lot of weird things like coloring books and things like that, just to relax and take your mind off. And even though I haven't used it yet, a lot of the athletes here on campus have talked about how just they think that was a really cool idea. Just because being a student athlete is your full-time job, and there's not always a lot of resources thrown your way. So the fact that they did that, I know a lot of people have been really appreciative of that.
Yeah, that's good. Showing that, just demonstrating, making those gestures are can sometimes have a good impact on showing that the organization cares about their students, right, or workers, even if it isn't used. We've talked a bit about the resources that they've provided. Is there anything that you want to say regarding, what isn't being provided, that may help increase the awareness of mental health issues, or what are some things that Georgia Tech can do?
I mean, I think this is sort of the obvious answer and something that people have addressed a lot in the last, or at least in the time I've been at Georgia Tech. But improving access to mental health resources is always something that I think could be done more. I think a couple of years ago, there was a big push to bring the counseling staff up to the national average. I don't know what's been done since then, but I think in general, just improving. I know a lot of people who would only go to the counseling center if they were having a crisis, whereas therapy can be really useful for everyone. And I think just making an effort to make that available to all students, not just ones who are having a really rough time, would be a great effort to improve well-being overall.
Yeah, someone doesn't normalizing emotional expression, I think, is very important in talking about the emotions that you're currently having, and having those emotions, the emotional expressions, not be seen as a general weakness is important, because bottling that stuff up over time leads to the crisis, and then you're using those, and that's the only time which is an acceptable time to use those resources, acceptable by the standards that they hold now. But yeah, I think normalizing it and allowing students who may be experiencing some downward trending negative emotions about their current experience would be a great way to improve well-being, but also mitigate the kind of really high kind of I'm breaking down stresses as well. That's a really good suggestion, Claire. What other thoughts do we have? That's okay, because I have a lot of thoughts too. So the question is kind of like what steps are being taken to raise mental awareness within the workplace, and a lot of it is being that there's a lot of organizations like NIOSH, sort of National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, the increase of occupational health well-being, but a lot of these mental health sort of initiatives are focused on like well-being interventions or providing well-being resources or access to well-being resources, which is great, but they don't often look at the structural or so organizational issues or any other sort of what is causing the stress, right? There's not a lot of like, let's change what these people are stressed out about, whether we're talking about you students or whether we're talking about workers. It's more of let's see if we can give them some sort of well-being resources to make them more happier. So I was just in a conversation the other day with people with looking at the strategic goal of increasing wellness across Georgia Tech, and I brought up this point because there are professors who care about their students' well-being, but they're not thinking about how their actions, whether it be through providing a disorganized semester, not keeping their students informed, not being receptive to any sort of criticism or feedback, or not being active on any of the sort of, what's the thing that psych doesn't use? We're used to talk to your professors more often than not. You make a comment on like this board, and then they're supposed to respond. Can't remember what that service is called. It's slipping my mind. Thought it's over to Pete. Anyway, not being receptive or just putting their lectures online without giving any thought, or not working with students who are in a crisis. You have Piazza. That's it. So I think that if you're talking about well-being interventions, you need to start with the people who are in charge at the sort of the high level to educate them, and then bring it down to, say, everyone else. Because without changing some of the structural components, without changing how work is done, you're not going to have that. You can have all the well-being resources in the world, and it's not going to change the well-being of your workers. So I don't think well-being needs to be the ultimate criterion. I know we just had that lecture, but if you want to improve well-being, you have to incentivize it at the same degree that you're incentivizing performance. Otherwise, it's always performance goals are always going to supersede well-being goals. So whether like in the case of this class or any other class, if my priority is making sure that you all are mentally well first, I think that will lead to better grades and better knowledge, engagement with the material. But it doesn't necessarily have to. I hope that is the change that you see within Georgia Tech soon, or some professors taking note of that. And I hope that's where you eventually work, where well-being is the end goal, not the performance. I doubt that's going to happen, but that's my 2 cents on it. Any comments or anything before moving on? Cool. All right, so there's this question from Zena. I'm going to pronounce your name wrong. I'm sorry. Based on the implicit leadership theory, being perceived as an effective leader and respected can be impacted by individuals' leadership prototypes. I think most people have leadership prototypes that are white older males due to old standards as well as media reiterating that particular prototype. I think the idea that other races or ages fitting into those prototypes have started to grow and progress. However, the idea of women still seem about the same. I have seen a few shows emphasizing that women are effective leaders, but I don't think the idea is resonating with people. My little cousin seems to still seem to be placed in stereotypical submissive roles. I think it's no secret that women have felt on the back burner when it comes to progression in multiple areas. I have no clue to how this problem could be addressed efficiently, and I'm curious to see if anyone else agrees or has any ideas, as well as ask the male students if your first couple ideas of what leaders are diverse and naturally include females. So the question is posed to you all in the class. What are your thoughts about this question? No thoughts? Does anyone have any prototypes in their mind of a female leader that's diverse when you're thinking about physiological characteristics? Or when you think of a leader, is it still just white older males? So I'll provide my 2 cents. So I don't think it could be addressed efficiently. Changing the culture takes time and effort. Patience is needed, but patience without meaningful progress is unjustifiable. The media helps by demonstrating putting women and minorities into narratives in which they hold positions of power, but that really isn't the answer. It's good to normalize it, but it's something that should be normalized in a different way, other through entertainment venues. Qualified by gender neutral standards, women need to be recognized more, whether that's in across different leadership positions and organizations, and they need to be promoted to positions of power. Importantly, the broader impact, which I think the media statement is I think designed to get at. One advantage that men generally have is practice of they're more likely, even at younger ages, to be engaged in leadership roles and learning more about what it means to be an effective leader, and that's problematic. So leaders should be leadership should be encouraged within women, and women should be put in positions of power at a younger age in more masculine dominated fields. So that was my 2 cents on that. We'll move on to question 5 from Claire, which is during the pandemic, classes had to suddenly switch to entirely virtual format. In some cases, such as her summer studio classes, teamwork was essential to gain the skills and knowledge the class offered. Electronic brainstorming and the virtual nature of the team ensured a level of anonymity to the idea generation phase of the class, but it became increasingly difficult to hold each group member accountable for their work later on in the project. Because many others experienced similar issues, virtual communication systems were rapidly improved, such as services like Miro, the collaborative whiteboards, Zoom, BlueJeans were forced to quickly enhance their functions and expand their product features. In light of these changes, has the tipping point for virtual teams been affected in any way? In the lecture, Dr. Weiss mentioned that when around 90% of the communication is computer mediated, virtual teams become less effective. How, if at all, has this number been affected by the pandemic? So what do you all think? You all have been operating on virtual teams thus far and had the opportunity to potentially work with some of these new features. Has your effectiveness, do you think, been affected?
I would say yes, because it's really hard to go to like an in-person class now, like leaving my apartment to walk all the way across campus to go to class is like a whole thing. Whereas if I was in my room, I could just pull it up on my laptop. But then if I'm in my room, then I can be on my phone, I can be multitasking like during lecture or whatever. And then whereas if I'm in class, it's kind of taboo to be on your phone in the middle of a lecture. I feel like that's a little bit rude to the professor. But then if I'm not paying attention during lecture, then I don't really know how to do the homework. And then I end up having to study a lot more on my own. So, like, yes, there's the convenience of not having to walk across campus, but then I have to learn things on my own. So, then there's like the communication of like, do all of my professors know how to use Zoom or not Zoom, BlueJeans or whatever platform they want to use? And are they speaking into the microphone? Are they doing all this stuff, which then sometimes gets lost in the video or whatever? And then I end up having to just figure it out on my own anyway for some classes.
So what about working in teams, and like do you use any of the platforms? Do you think, in any group project that any of y'all have had these last 2 semesters, has it been more or less effective than doing it in person?
I'd say for the group projects I've had, it's definitely been, the communication's been less effective, especially with like the flexibility that being virtual gives. Is normally you'd have a class time that you'd be going to where your group mates are going to be there and you can talk to them. But now people in one of the groups that I'm in, they don't watch lecture on the given schedule. So we'll be trying to meet during class time and they'll be like, oh, sorry, I can't. And then they just totally missed out on whatever we're talking about that day. Where if it was in person, it seems in the past it's been a lot easier to like coordinate schedules with each other.
That's fair. Yeah, I agree with that. So instead of forcing a lot of y'all to speak a little bit more, I'll give my 2 cents on the answer. So much as well, like what you said, Taylor, essentially didn't say that you were using any of these functions more. And no one brought up using these kind of new ways to externalize your cognition into some sort of platform, right? So these functions have actually been there for a while. They aren't new. They're just new to you all who are using them for the first time. And they're essentially useless if folks aren't trained in any way of how to use them. There isn't a culture that supports the use of these things. People don't see the value in using them or see the value of abusing them, like time tracking systems where you just have to install a program, and if it's based upon your mouse movement, then you just move your mouse every couple minutes to show that you're active on your computer. And they aren't part of people's routines. The flexibility that being online provides you can actually be detrimental if not everyone's on the same sort of routine or schedule. And I'll skip this next question about asking you about what are the most effective strategies you've seen, but generally speaking, the way that you get folks to use them is by working through it together, and using some of these tools for more social oriented reasons rather than just a single purpose. So that has been shown to increase the effectiveness of using these virtual tools, which may change the tipping point from 90% if people are using the tools as they were designed to be used. So Ricardo asks, one point talked about in chapter 12 in groups and teams was very interesting, and I want to know more about it. This is a bit more about myself, and I can understand my team ethic better, all while striving for better companionship. One slide mentioned the roles and defined it as a set of behaviors expected of a person who occupies a particular position in a group. I've recently heard and had the experience with online members not understanding what their role in the team was when the other met in person. They cannot participate in live prototyping yet. Advisors just say to try and participate with whatever they can. The question I had for this section is how can a team help a lost team member find their role in the team and assure them that they can help in more ways. COVID has caused the separation of teams, and I wanted to hear some input on what everyone else may be thinking about the situation. So I'll give you all an opportunity to think about how you've helped potentially team members find their role, and then I'll give my 2 cents. Since it's shaping up to be one of those days, one of the most important things that you can do when you're starting off a team is have a team contract. So this team contract goes over things like what everyone's role is on the team, how to manage and mitigate conflict, how to when you're going to meet, how you're going to meet, get everyone on the same page. And an important component of a team contract is that it can change over time, so you can always revisit it. So if you have somebody that's lost and doesn't understand your roles, you all need to get together and talk through it. What their role has been in the past and how the roles may change in the future. So if some responsibilities belong to member A, but member B, the new person or the lost person may be more generally qualified or can take on that responsibility, some of the role responsibilities may be redistributed when you revisit this team contract. And that's what it's for, to make sure that everyone is sort of on the same page that everyone has the same expectations, that people know, say, how conflict is going to be resolved, what the purpose of the project is, what the purpose of particular roles are. So having that team contract at the very beginning helps set that standard, but it can be revisited over time so that, if membership changes or someone becomes lost, is unclear what they're supposed to do, you can bring them back into the fold. The last question, I think, no, there might be one more after this. Today is, I realized we have been discussing a lot about stress and well-being during the pandemic, but I want to look into the transition out of COVID. While COVID is still relevant in the foreseeable future, do you think it's possible to be vaccinated or not, if that's correlated with leadership? Much like how gender correlates with leadership in certain fields, with the glass ceiling effect, etc. So I just want to clarify really quickly. Did you mean like that good leaders will be vaccinated? If so, I have some thoughts, but I'd like to hear yours first. All right. The answer is no. I don't think it will be related to good leadership. But the issue is that leadership should not be related to whether or not you believe that that you should be vaccinated or not. The reason is some leaders who exhibit good characteristics for leadership will have different opinions on vaccination. So you may have, someone engaging in good leadership that believes in vaccination, and other people engaging in good leadership not believing in vaccination. These two constructs should not be related to one another. But if they are, then you have to kind of understand maybe there's some sort of third variable confounding this relationship. And the last question from Joseph is, during the stress and well-being lecture, Dr. Weiss discussed the various stressors and strains that ultimately resulted in stress. And I was particularly interested in how these factors have become more or less apparent in response to COVID. Given that the majority of individuals have adopted to a more remote style of work and therefore hold more responsibility in terms of completing work by the deadline and staying motivated, to what extent have the three types of strain, job-related, emotion, physiological changed in order to impact stress? As more people are worried about getting sick and as people are worried about getting sick and social isolation has prevented many from exposure to face-to-face interactions, COVID could definitely have a significant effect on motivation, emotional exhaustion, and many other negative factors. How has stress levels changed as a society has shifted to an online front? And are organizations implementing coping initiatives to help these issues? I'm also interested in learning how COVID has impacted groups and teams, as communication and coordination of meetings can sometimes be difficult when completing a task without much interaction. As working in a team is a vital component of growth both in and out of the workplace, individuals often get exposure to such interactions. However, to what extent has the structure and coordination of groups changed given the more digital format of completing work? And how has this affected social loafing? What plans, solutions are being executed to monitor and evaluate individual progress? So with that, the later set of questions dealing with the groups, I think that the solution is essentially you don't want to monitor or evaluate individual progress on the degree, I think, in which you're inferring through some sort of back channeling data. What you want to do is engage in activities that hopefully increase the engagement of individuals, and that should promote in and of itself the performance of those individuals within the work environment. The social mechanism is really hard to address, as there are many different outlets there are many different online outlets of social interaction. What you need to do is normalize whatever you're using within that work environment in order to promote those social connections that will hopefully then promote the cohesion of that team and their well-being. With respect to the first set of questions, how has stress levels changed as society shifts to an online format? They have increased. For example, and I'm going to call you guys out, take participation in this class. You know, it's stressful enough for you all to be sort of trying to regulate your attention to this lecture, as well as being primed to think about all of the other things around you. The decision of like what the mental resources that you all are taking to decide, you know, what I should be paying attention to at any given moment are taxing. And because there is that tax, your stress levels increase because you feel to some degree obligated to listen to this lecture, as well as you're feeling obligated to take some time off for yourself or do some other task associated with another class or engage in some other responsibility. So those are sort of the cognitive mechanisms that are generally increasing stress for you all, but are increasing stress generally, again, all around. You have many different distractions. You're not in a classroom. You're not so forced to pay attention. Same thing goes for online workers right now. They have all of these other responsibilities that are all around them. And it becomes a cognitive resource that they need to expend that can have deleterious effects for their well-being. That's what we've talked about it before. That's what conservation of resource theory gets at, right? People want to hold on to as many resources as they can and don't want to expend the resources. And any resource expenditure, even if it's not like, you know, working out or doing some sort of physical action, cognitive resources, the ones in the back of your head that are sometimes unconscious and implicit, can be draining and decrease your well-being. So COVID has definitely affected the motivation, emotional exhaustion, and many other negative factors. The thing is that, you know, what is job related has changed too. It's not confined to a physical presence within work. What is emotional related has changed as well. Physiological, you may not be doing manual labor when you're working from home, but you're sitting at your desk all day and not changing around. So yeah, everything is sort of changed in a lot of different ways. I think when we return to work, there will be some adjustments that people will make, and we'll go through this transition process again. So those are my 2 cents. And on that note, that's the last question. Again, we'll have a debate on Monday. You'll all have a mental health day on Wednesday, and then the exam review again on the following Monday. Have a good one.
Thank you.